Hello, everyone. I'm Nick Diakopoulos. I'm an associate professor at Northwestern University, and I'm presenting our paper on behalf of my co-authors, Daniel Trielli and Grace Lee, also at Northwestern University. So there's a lot going on in the world every day. And the question is, how do journalists decide what they're going to write about and cover every day? What's newsworthy? Is the thing that they wrote up the most interesting thing they could have written up? There's many avenues for journalists to learn about and advance ideas for news stories, including things like developing a strong social network and connections to a community. But an emerging technique that I want to talk about here today is what we're referring to as computational news discovery, which we define as the use of algorithms to orient editorial attention to potentially newsworthy events or information prior to publication. The idea is really to ask questions like, can we help journalists be more efficient in the news discovery process? Can we help them be more comprehensive in their ability to monitor the world for interesting and important events? Or maybe even to help them find stories that they maybe never would have seen without the aid of a computer? Practically speaking, these tools send alerts and leads based on data-driven algorithmic analysis to help orient journalists' attention to events, documents, or anomalous patterns in data that are more likely to be newsworthy. Now, previous work has built tools for things like social media monitoring, monitoring numeric data streams, or monitoring local meetings. But what there's far less of are extended evaluations of these types of tools, which is something that we address in this work. Now, in this work in particular, we design and develop a system called algorithm tips. And the goal is really to enable algorithmic accountability reporting and to support news discovery of algorithmic decision-making tools in US government. So what's going on with these ADMs in use in government? Now, in order to design this tool, which you can see in the slide on the right, we developed three design goals for the tool. The first is the idea of being sensitive to journalistic effort and attention. And this is really about being aware of the attention economy in the newsroom by trying to align the suggested leads from algorithm tips to the particular interests of journalists. And you can see this reflected in the interface at the top in terms of search and filtering capabilities, as well as in other components of the tool that allow for things like scheduling of alert emails. The second design goal relates to the idea of enabling initial verification and quality assessment. This is really about providing adequate context to help journalists evaluate or verify information and to launch into follow-up research. So things like linking to original source documents, providing provenance information, offering temporal context. And you can also see this reflected in some of the metadata in the interface. And then finally, we have the design goal of enabling newsworthiness evaluation. And this really gets back to enabling journalists to come to their own determinations about newsworthiness. For instance, by providing relevant metadata so that journalists can make interpretations of newsworthiness. And one of the novel things that we tried out here was the integration of crowdsourced ratings of newsworthiness to see whether and how that information might inform expert evaluations of newsworthiness. So here you can see the process, the information process we developed to support algorithm tips. The process really leverages both machine learning and automation, as well as crowdsourcing and expert evaluation in surveilling the internet for documents that may be of interest to journalists on this beat. So we first collect government documents automatically every week using a search engine that's tuned to a set of almost 100 different keywords and phrases. Then we automatically rank those documents based on relevance to the beat using a machine learned model that was trained over the course of several years on several hundred manually annotated documents. We then have crowd workers who rate the newsworthiness of the leads along dimensions of things like impact, magnitude, controversy, and surprise. We have internal student journalists summarize and add further metadata to the leads in order to make the presentation of that lead more compelling, as well as to ensure the high quality of information provided by the tool. And then finally, leads are automatically delivered to journalists who have subscribed to a weekly email alert. So you can see that both people and automation and machine learning are woven together in this process. Now, I mentioned a main goal here was the evaluation and deployment of algorithm tips. What we ended up doing was we deployed the tool for 8 weeks in the summer of 2020. We recruited 8 professional journalists who actually have experience covering algorithms in society, and we had them sign up to receive alerts for 8 weeks that summer. At the end of the 8 weeks, we then interviewed them. We asked about things like the features in the tool, how they were thinking about newsworthiness, whether or not they were using the crowd ratings, how it fit with their broader workflow, and so on. And we did a qualitative thematic analysis of the interview transcripts to gain some insights here, which I will tell you about. So one of the things we found is that the design goals were pretty much well received. Of course, there were some avenues for improvement. So our participants saw algorithm tips as a jumping off point for their investigations. They thought the tool provided contextual information and helped facilitate verifying and assessing the quality of leads. They also reflected how their evaluations of newsworthiness were very contextual, and that the information provided by algorithm tips, including different pieces of metadata included in the interface, could help them assess whether the leads were newsworthy in their specific context. Our evaluation also clarified several opportunities for improving the algorithm tips design. So participants suggested improvements related to things like navigation and filtering of leads, the conceptual definition of the leads that we're tracking, and also enhancements in the contextual information conveyed about the leads. We found that the reporting context that participants conveyed could vary quite a lot. And so we think kind of a deeper takeaway here is that these computational news discovery tools really need to be designed so they can be parameterized so that journalists can configure them to meet their specific needs and goals and context. So for instance, different reporters understood different definitions of algorithmic decision-making, which you might try to build into the tool or make configurable in the tool. Now, in terms of newsworthiness, one idea for future work here is to move beyond abstract ideas of newsworthiness and to develop a more domain-specific criteria of newsworthiness, things like bias and discrimination, or whether or not the algorithm uses sensitive or personal information. These things might also be conveyed in the tool. And while participants were generally interested in the crowdsourced ratings, they did come away from the study with varying levels of interest and use for that information. So an interesting area for future work here would be to do more in-depth studies of how and why journalists might or might not incorporate crowd assessments of newsworthiness into their own expert judgments. Now, while our evaluation suggests that the tool was beneficial in informing journalists' practices of lead development, we also found the downstream effort required for things like investigative journalism or enterprise journalism, things like document inspection, public records requests, talking to sources, and so on. All of this work is still very substantial. So I just want to emphasize that, we found that algorithm tips was useful to journalists, but not necessarily in terms of time saving. Instead, the tool was much more of a complement and really kind of demanded substantive human input in order to get the most out of it. So thanks very much for your attention, and I hope you'll be in touch with any comments or questions. Thanks.